about treatments in my pitch process because it's never really even happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's really good to know. By the look of your work, it's very satirical, and I've seen a lot of your like short film work explode. So I haven't, so that makes a lot of sense. But when I noticed that, yeah, you sort of help other directors on their pitches, I think it would be so interesting to hear your perspective as guiding people, in that process. So yeah, I'm sure you have, you know, so much to share in terms of like a global POV since you're working with various directors. Are you mostly working with comedy directors? Are you and are you? I'm assuming you're writing for them, or are you
Yeah.
designing?
So just so I know, are the people in this podcast, they want to know like even how the process works, like from the ground up, or these are people kind of coming and with some knowledge of the treatment process and like wanting to
Yeah,
know more tips to better it.
yeah. I think the audience is, mainly like emerging directors that probably, at least like this is something I just wish that I had starting out, because you have so, like every part of the process you have to do. You have to do the writing, the image pull, and the design, and more more so talking to freelance emerging directors.
Mm,
But I think anyone can Google what a director treatment is. So I think like that's established, but it's really about you know what is the nitty gritty of sort of like a losing and winning treatment, or how do you really
yeah.
succeed and stand out, and kind of that threshold of getting past just the couple years of just making treatments when you want to elevate them. Right.
Sure. So it's a two-part
Okay.
answer. One is I actually don't think it's about the treatment, which might be different in your process. I think people should actually put all of their focus into their portfolio and getting their reel up. And then the treatment is like, it could even be an okay treatment, but if your portfolio has got everything the agency wants to see, you're going to get it. If you
Yeah.
have a $70 million treatment with like GIFs and hand printed, things and chocolate flying out of it. It's just like the best imagery ever. You're not going to get that job if it's not on your reel. And a 50-year-old guy with maybe a 5-pager and a few full bleed images and kind of clever jokes with everything on his reel to match that job, he's going to get that job. So I think someone who wants the job needs to focus primarily on building their reel
Yeah.
first. Um,
Yeah.
that's not to say that the treatment isn't important. I think it, the treatment is probably going to elevate you more if you're maybe doing a music video or like a project where they're not after this one director or one thing at the top.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the director in many ways is kind of like, you know, I don't know. I don't This is a big analogy, but kind of like, the President of the United States, he gets hired not only for who he is, but who he's going to hire in each department in his cabinet. So,
Yeah.
and to know what they will bring and how to describe what they need to do. So I think
Mm-hmm.
having a treatment that really goes into depth in each department and showcases your knowledge of each department and maybe not even your knowledge, but also your thought into each department. So like
Mm-hmm.
if you have something on sound design and it's not just like we're gonna have sound design that's really gonna be driving and crisp, like not generic adjectives, but actually supplying ideas like, oh, we're doing I don't know, a commercial for um I don't know, bomb awareness, but like for the sound design, we want everyone to be whispering, and we want to have no music and we want to highlight the wind to go, juxtapose silence and, the expectation of noise in something. You're like, whoa, you're really thinking about each element and what you're bringing to it. I think really putting thought into each department and not just saying, okay, costumes. Okay, we're going to have really cool historical costumes and like here's the top kind of vogue costume designers with the costume references. Like bring a unique perspective and thought into it and challenge yourself I think sometimes to not go with your first idea, but with your second
Mm,
idea. Because sometimes your first idea is your ego and
mm,
it's saying, oh, this is what I think will get me the job. And your second idea is like, well, if I got it, what would I really want to do with it?
mhm. Yeah,
Um,
I love that advice. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the pieces of the puzzle are, yeah, the real, the creative call, and then the treatment process. And like, I think it would be interesting to hear from you if you have any insights on, like, let's say you, because it's that conundrum I think that every director gets in, which is like, the spot isn't on my reel, like the exact spot isn't on my reel. So how big of a leap is my are they going to take on me, or is it just, am I just in the triple bid and I'm just one of the bidders because they have to triple bid? So it's always kind of a toss up. And do you feel like how
yeah.
have you seen maybe directors that you've worked with, knowing that they may not be the preferred bidder, how do you still position yourself in the treatment process to either, do you make a good impression, or do you go big, or knowing maybe that you don't have the exact spot on your reel?
You have to go through a side door if you can't fit in the main door. So um, this is something Daniels did. I worked at Pretty Bird for a bit
Yeah.
in-house doing the treatments, and they opened my mind to, okay, it shouldn't maybe just be the treatment you should be considering, but like, what's the pitch material, you're giving
Mm.
to someone. So with Daniels was they were pitching this commercial for Gillette, and they were up against huge directors. And what they did was, I forget if it was Gillette or something else, but what they did was they put the song underneath the video of them describing each thing, and they would make sounds, and they're like, wow, and then you're going to see this thing come in, and you're like, you got their personality from it, and
Yeah.
it walked you through it in a visual way, and you got to know them and their directing style and their excitement, and it was just something the other director didn't have, and they couldn't compete with it. So there was another example of a director where I think it was like some hotel somewhere, and you couldn't get the images from the hotel. They weren't online. So they ended up going to this hotel and they took their DSLR and they ended up taking really beautiful photos, and they put them in the treatment. And on the call, they're like, how did you get these photos? And the director was sitting in a chair with his iPhone on the conference call. And they're like, where are you? He's like, oh, I'm at the hotel. Like, I came here to show you that I am here and I've looked through this place. And he talked about what he felt inside the environment. Um,
Mm.
and the photos he shared, and he had the experience already. So it's almost like you have to put yourself into the project as if you're already doing it,
Mhm.
if you can't compete with a PDF. And that might
Yeah.
mean, oh, I don't have something for ketchup dipping sauce on my reel. It sucks if you're a beginning director, but like, I don't know, spend $200, get some UCB friends and like a DSLR and rent a $20 light and make a really funny film with ketchup to like supplement your treatment. And like that will go, I think, a long
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Yeah, I love, that perspective that, it's like immersing yourself in the world, because they often say just speak as if you have the job, like speak as if you are, talking them through it happening, happening in the future. It just comes from a point of view that's more immersed. And the idea that you would, talk about the campaign while sitting in the hotel that you're bidding, I think is like just another level of brilliance of immersing yourself in the world. I think that's so fascinating. Um, when you are, I guess, working with other directors from your point of view, do you feel like, I think the biggest thing is, how do you connect with a brand that you may not have an initial connection with, or that you're not familiar with, or you're a brilliant writer, so I think you kind of have to put like a different hat on and really amp yourself up into immerse yourself into this world. But is there exercises that you do that can kind of like get your mind into a brand that maybe you don't feel connected to, just to kind of write from that perspective?
Yeah, and my experience is biased because I'm a writer director. I feel
Yeah.
like I'm not comfortable directing a spot and not trying to put some writing into it or some creative into it. Other
Yeah.
directors are totally fine saying, I am hired as the technical executor because the agency doesn't know what to tell a cameraman.
Yeah.
And I'm here to kind of just embellish and maybe add a couple lines, but like I'm just an executor.
Yeah.
And I don't feel that way.
Yeah.
Um, which is maybe why it's been tougher for me to get jobs because I rewrite everything that they give me. But to connect to a brand, I think this is true also with, you know, people in general, that a lot of people out there are concerned with more the end result of like how they'll be perceived and like who will like everything and to kind of do the mathematics to be accepted by society rather than what do I really connect with, which will ultimately exile some people, but you don't really want those people
Mm-hmm.
anyway. So, and
Mm-hmm.
I think of brands, I hate this in briefs when they're like, well, we want to do something viral. So like we were thinking like we hire like the baby and like these three TikTokers because those are viral and we put them in a blender and then we get viral, right? Like no, no, no. Like these people went viral without an equation. They just were themselves. So I think you have to go inside out. You have to see what the brand is about. And I don't mean something like, oh, positivity and like be yourself, like much deeper than that. And I think brands that are great with that are IKEA, Coke, Hornbach, um, Magnum ice cream. I mean, these are
Mm-hmm.
brands that really understand their slogan and
Mm-hmm.
their purpose, and
Mm-hmm.
then billions of ideas come out of that. But if you're just trying to slap references on everything, like, oh, we want this kind of crowd, so like let's make sure we do this, and maybe like we want these type of characters, you kind of Frankenstein a creative
Mm-hmm.
together. It's it's gonna look awesome and it will be forgotten in seconds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it always goes back to like that core foundation of a brand really understanding their values to be able to build on. Because, yeah, if they're kind of always like shifting for the trend at the moment, then it's just going to make the ground underneath them constantly like, well, we want to target this, but then we also want to target this. And, you have to have a point of view, and you're not everyone's going to love your brand. So, if you keep trying to chase a different audience and there's they have different ideas or different goals, I mean, I think that is such a good point because it comes through from the top or from you see it in the campaign that it's just too wishy-washy. Like, how can you bid or treat on an idea that's trying to be too many things, and I've definitely been in that position where I've gotten briefs where, if you're unclear about it, I almost feel like, okay, well, it's my role to kind of fix, and like solidify this a little bit more because maybe they're getting too many asks from, a fearful client that really wants to, that isn't used to the process or something, or isn't, willing to take risks, which is very often. But then when you do get those clients that are, willing to take risks, it's so exciting and so liberating. But those don't often come around very often. But I'd love to hear about, because I think you're constantly challenging things and you're so rooted in your characters and your writing and your point of view on the world. Um, so if either through your experience or through the experience of, other working with other directors, but I think, it's always how much can you bend an idea that's brought to you that to make it, to shape it through your lens without totally breaking it. Um, I think there's like a subtle art there between kind of finding that fine line.
I think it's a conversation. There's two ways. One, I think you need to be um, polite with your kind of
Yeah.
rebellion a little bit, and knowing that these people are paying a lot of money for an idea, and like they
Yeah.
also, it's a collaboration to some extent, and you're not there to come in and turn it into 180 and it's all about you. Like a lot of these creatives are underpaid, overworked, and worked through 180 ideas to pitch that, and then it comes to you and you're like, yeah, I just kind of want to do my own thing with it. Like that's also rude. So I think
Yeah.
one, I think it's a good question to ask on the call. I have a lot of ideas, and I kind of feel like we can take this a lot of directions and we can kind of go hard, but what are the parameters you feel and what are the margins? Like, let's establish the bumpers and the bowling alleys so that I know how far I can push the line. Where is the line for you? And they might say, do anything, but don't talk about X. And you're like, okay, great.
Hmm.
So I have kind of a limiter on things.
Hmm.
And then another thing is, you can do a treatment that's kind of safe with some of your ideas, and then you can put in italics or even an addendum saying like, hey, so I think this could work. Also, I have this other kind of idea plus a little steroids, take on it, and you could put it in italics. And I was like, I just want to present this in addition. And the fact that you know that you've got the safe thing down, and they're like, okay, he could do that if we want, but they have the choice, I think could also open doors.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. It's like the version of you tame, the version of you on steroids, pick and choose which
Yeah,
which direction. Because I think that they want like levels of crazy that they can pitch. They always want options. I was like,
love
does
options.
this go through too far? Yeah. Your short that is literally like two of our good friends. Like I didn't realize Rick and Hillary were both like the voiceover of the
Mm,
pitch, but it's that in of itself is just it's just so juicy. It's just so brilliant, and I'm wondering. I mean, you must listen to a ton of creative calls just to
hundreds.
know the evolution of the craziness of the idea on the call. But so from your perspective, have you? Is it been very clear when you get off a creative call that the director completely like blew it, or if the director did a great job, or is it just wishy-washy? Because I always wonder, the difference between stepping off that creative call and beginning your treatment. What are your chances of turning things around, or is it already kind of predetermined by the creative call? Like, do you get a sense of it, or does anyone get a sense of it, or is it still like we have no control?
We have no
Yeah.
control. You can have an incredible call and the job dies.
Oh yeah.
You can have an incredible call and then David Fincher is actually available and you don't get it. You can have an incredible call and then offline they were just smiling and they actually didn't really like any of your ideas. You
Yeah.
could also have an incredible call, an incredible treatment where the clients love it and then they pass it on, even if you're the recommend, to the account director, who's some vanilla person who's just stamping the ideas through their client. And they're like, this is a little too risky. And they say no, and they go with option B, and then you never get even an explanation.
Yeah.
So, and then you don't know what you're gonna get. I don't know. It's like you go on a date, and you're like, this was the best date. I went on a date 3 years ago. It was one of the best dates I've ever been on. We walked home. She's like, this was one of the best times I've ever had on a date. And I said, great. Like, let's hang out next week. She said, absolutely. Texted me the next day. She's like, hey, I'm really not feeling it. I just, I'm getting involved in something else, and it's just I'm not feeling the vibe. So it's
Wow.
kind of like that.
Wow. Yeah. What would you say to I mean, really it could be directors in any part of the career, but emerging directors, talk to me as a friend, but how do you learn to lose, and what's your advice that you just like you shake it off, you have a lot more going on. You're focused on your own projects, but I think the art of losing in of itself is like a big part of this industry that we're involved in.
I don't even think you should look at it like winning or losing. I think you should just keep making stuff and flexing your ideas. And every time you're making a treatment or you're pitching an idea or you're kind of sharpening your ballpoint pen by dissecting creative, like
Mm-hmm.
that's a win
Yeah,
in many ways because you're learning so much. And maybe that idea or that way you didn't look at it, that one that got rejected from Coke, you're going to pitch on a Sprite thing, or like a
yeah, yeah,
Fanta thing in 2 months. You're like, oh crap, I can use that kind of carbonated sound design for this. So I
yeah,
think don't look at it like a win-lose thing. I think look
yeah,
at it as just a practice thing.
yeah. Oh, that's such good advice. I love that. I think that's the perfect way to end on a high note. And 1 minute before you're
I
out.
I have a little bit longer if needed because
Um, I mean, no, I feel like that is just such a perfect way to end it. I mean, I guess do you have any opinions on the length or the how much detail do you go into? Is there a sense of oversharing ideas, or how much do you protect? How much do you just kind of give more generalized ideas of things without getting into the nitty gritty, or do you always want to get really detailed? Do you always want to get into revealing everything and kind of just being an open book?
I think it's like flirt with them a little bit and see how it goes. Like if talk about it kind of generally, and if they're like, "Ooh, like what do you mean by that?" And they're like, then you get a little more detailed, and then you also get a little more uh, detailed with it,
Mm-hmm.
so that you're not held accountable. If you're like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, I kind of have this idea where maybe one thing is they could you know uh, go to the candy store instead," and they're like, "Ooh, a candy store. We didn't think about that." If they seem interested, then you can attack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really great perspective.
And also, don't chase these like big brands. I feel like so many people lose because we're all chasing the same exact things. And like, do you know how many amazing small to medium brands and agencies are out there if you just stop researching these like top 40 like Saatchi, Droga, Wyden things?
Yeah.
Like there and you would know this probably even more than I just uh, the other day I went to Erewhon and I was like, I have an idea for a fiber commercial. And me and the supermarket clerk, I was like, show me the best fiber brands you have here. And he's like, this is a good one. This is a good one. And I just wrote them down, and then you just see like which agencies represent these fiber brands. Like kind of reverse engineering the process a bit. So like people complain about how the system is, and then they just play the same system. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you're upset with the system, then find your own side doors for it a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, by your work, I feel like you're always entering through the side door. I think it's such a telling way of like how you see things. And yeah, I would agree with that. I think a lot of the projects, some of my favorite work is through like small to mid-size agencies, because you have a little bit more liberty and more control over bringing
Yeah.
your point of view across. And they, might not have, 10 chefs in the kitchen. Like, I and a lot of like PR agencies, I feel like go a little bit bigger and wackier, because it's not as big of a media buy, so maybe it's not as so much pressure. But I totally agree with that. I think there's
Why would
to come
you
from.
want pressure? Like I was driving home the other day, there was traffic, and there were 18 trucks outside staged for a Doritos commercial. That was 15 seconds, and it was probably someone's hand dipping a chip into guacamole. And they shut down 3 blocks for it. I was like, why would you want to shut down part of LA and have the pressure of hundreds of people looking at you like, is he dipping the chip okay? Or is that okay? It's too little. I would never want that.
Yeah, yeah, it can get into the nitty gritty. I've recently had some things where you're trying to uh, direct a natural, authentic surprise, and then you go through the poor, like the actor that has to run through 20 iterations of that, and then it just keeps like dying and dying and dying, and you're just like, what, where are we, like the dipping of the chip. But authentic surprises, you're gonna really want to focus on that in the first few takes. You don't want to like overkill the vibe, and but sometimes if the client isn't happy, we're just gonna like go again, go again.
Yeah, and then you get the chip choreographer, and you have the whole thing for like on in the treatment, like 4 pages. Like, is it the left hand, the right hand? Is it these two fingers holding the chip? And you have
Yeah,
silly.
yeah. uh what have you ever seen or been on like or have you presented a pitch to, like, after the treatment's done?
Oh, maybe not present, but I've had like a follow-up call after they've read. Is
Oh,
that what you
okay,
mean?
cool. Yeah, like a debrief kind of thing.
Yeah,
Oh, Rob is listening in. Are you a fan of Rob Saucy 2.0? He says,
maybe.
hell yeah.
Hi, Rob Saucy.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I wonder, does anyone in the audience have any questions for Eno while we're still here? Um, Let me think. Is there any juicy questions I'm leaving out? Um, I mean, do you know when it's done? Do you know when you've sort of finished the writing, or do you sort of give yourself? Are you constantly tweaking the up until like the delivery? Um, do you kind of look at it in terms of, I've already put everything on the page, and in terms of my ROI on my timing, I'm not going to spend 40 hours on this thing. I'm going to spend 10, and I want to make sure it's just my timing is spent in a calculated way. Like, do you sort of like set deadlines with the amount of time that you work on treatments, knowing that a lot of things are out of our control? Or do you just keep writing until you feel like you've gotten it all out?
Mm, I don't think that writing is the hard part or the long part. I think the thinking is the hard part and the long part, because I think the hardest thing is to crack the idea.
Uh,
and and it I was pitching on this underwear commercial, and I was thinking of all these weird fun kind of camera tricks. I was like, well, what is this really
right,
about? And then I was like,
right.
it's about feeling like a kid ultimately. And
Mm,
it took me 3 days to go through my ego to find out that it's just about feeling like you did when you were a little kid running around in a house and you didn't care, and it wasn't flipping the middle finger like I'm going to be the best me. It was this unadulterated youth and this feeling of freedom in a much less sinister way.
mm,
And from that, I had all the pillars of like camera and costume, and I was like, well, what would this look like? Well, this is easy. Camera. If it's about a kid, low angle, wide, freeform, like you're running with the camera. Costume, loose, colorful, like everything just comes out of the idea.
yeah. So it's almost like it sounds like you kind of get everything out immediately, and it almost could be like all of the frontal lobe like bad ideas, like, or like the first draft is just get
Mm,
everything out, because you probably wouldn't get to that second phase without just getting out maybe the ego driven
yeah,
bad ideas that are like, I'm going to make this all about transitions, even though it doesn't really tell the story. And then you get to this chapter 2 of your process, where you're really getting into going back to the root of it, and because you couldn't really get there without going through
right.
the bad
And
ideas first.
And the insurance on this process creatively is that if you're on set and you're just Frankensteining transitions and concepts and things like that, if something doesn't work, you're going to have to think of other cool transitions. But if you know your idea in and out, it is so easy if someone's like, okay, the handheld camera's not working. What else can we do? You're like, okay, well, it's about a kid. Let's try low angle. Like, they're like, low angle doesn't work. What else? I don't know, let's use a pinhole camera. So he's spying like on his little brother. Like every idea will come out of it so easily once you know what it's about.
Yeah. Yeah. So much great advice. I'm so excited that we talked, and I've learned so much about the process of letting go and just treating it like practice. I think
Yeah.
your perspective is so great and so refreshing, and yeah, I'm super grateful you hopped on. Everyone needs to check out your work. Your Instagram is Eno Eyes, correct?
Yeah, and I got a new piece coming out in a few days, so I'm excited to get that out.
Yeah, the new short.
Hmm.
Do you want to like speak to that briefly? The cover image is incredible. I mean, the hair, makeup, and wardrobe of you is like a whole
Thank
new
you.
character that is I'm really excited to see.
It is about the news. I've felt unable to metabolize a lot of the news going on lately, and even, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, since the election a few years ago, and it's been difficult for me to engage in conversation with people sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought a really good way in could be comedy that was very general and zoomed out to kind of bring us together and talk about some of these concepts going on. So it's called Unbiased News, and it's a look at what a news network would be like if we didn't disagree on anything.
Yeah.
Because people always complain about a news network's biased. I was like, okay, well, what would it look like if it wasn't? Um,
Yeah.
so it's a look into that, and I play every newscaster with different wigs. Um, Shout out
Wow.
to Amazon for the return policy, and um, yeah, I think it's not insulting by any means. It's very general, but I'm interested to see the
Amazing.
reception to it.
Brilliant. I relate. I'm sure there's so many people that are going to relate to it, and always coming through your lens of satire and humor is always like a breath of fresh air. So can't wait. Can't wait to see it. Is it going to be released publicly, or is it just going to do the film festival circuit first? Or
Oh man, we could have a whole other podcast on
I
film
know. I know.
festivals.
I'm getting off topic. Well,
Um,
well, this will have to
it's
save this
gonna
for
be
another.
online. No, it's
Okay.
gonna be online.
Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right. Cool. Well, yeah. Thanks for your
And
time.
yeah, yeah. Thanks so much for having me and doing this, and I hope to see you soon.
Yes. Yes, you always throw the best parties, so I'm sure I'll be seeing you at one of those.
Do it. Let's bring some wigs. We'll
All
do it.
right. All right. Talk to you later. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.